We continue in Genesis chapter 11, starting in verse 10, and moving on to verse 19. Wow. Let's read this. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begot Arphaxad 500 years and begot sons and daughters. Did you get that? He kept on begetting sons and daughters. That's Shem. And Arphaxad lived 35 years and begot Salah. And Arphaxad lived after he begot Salah. How long? 403 years and begot sons and daughters. And Salah lived 30 years and begot Eber. And Salah lived after he begot Eber 403 years and begot sons and daughters. And Eber lived 430 years, that's 34 years, and begot Peleg. And Eber lived after he begot Peleg 430 years and begot sons and daughters. And Peleg lived 30 years and begot Reu, R-E-U. And Peleg lived after he begot Reu 209 years and begot sons and daughters. Now we've gone through a whole bunch of names, and it's easy how people could be bored by it, thinking it was so tedious, name after name after name. But here, the Bible just covers the line that will eventually lead to our Lord Jesus Christ. But remember, there wasn't just Shem. There was the line of Japheth, and there was also the line of Ham. So between these three lines, there was a lot of producing humans going on. Now it says that Shem's oldest, was born 2 years after the flood. Considering that it would take maybe 18 years, give or take a few, to get married and have children. Remember, they lived so long after they had that son, and then they begot a whole bunch more. And we're not even talking about the others. They begat children, and they begat children, and they kept on begetting children. So between the three families, people were marrying aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, first cousins. My goodness, there's a lot of begetting going on. Now, from the flood to Peleg in verse 18, actually verse 16 and 17. I just read that. I'll read verse 16 and 17 again. And Eber lived 430 years and begot Peleg. Now Peleg means division. Let's unpack it, and then I'll talk about it when we get there. Now previously, when covering verse 6 of chapter 11, we mentioned a remnant always preserved by God. We mentioned Noah and Shem. When they divided, there was still people speaking Hebrew or something like it. Back in chapter 10, verses 21 to 31, which we also read before, there was a general overview of Shem's descendants. But here we concentrate on Shem again. What is the reason for that? Obviously, many of Shem's descendants were part of the confederacy led by Nimrod, the emperor. But here we start a new account of the generations of Shem, and it is a selective account. I need to make you understand this. It's a selective account. The one that would be part of the genealogy leading to none other than Jesus Christ our Lord. So it included the rest of those names mentioned in chapter 10 without mentioning their names. They were simply called begotten sons and daughters. But this happened with the other two sets of nations as well. So people were able to get together after 18 years of the flood, or within 18 to 20 years of the flood, and then keep getting together because they wanted to produce babies. And it is not beyond a stretch of the imagination that within 101 years, when Peleg came on the scene, 101 years after the flood, that there could have been about 10,000 people living in the Shinar Valley. And there were still more children being born and more babies coming up and growing up and getting more babies. Now in verse 10, which we started reading, we discover that Arphaxad was born just 2 years after the flood. He was Shem's oldest son. Apparently, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, born 100 years before the flood, didn't have any children at all before the flood. You know what? I don't think they would have had time, as they were concentrating on building that ark. So after Arphaxad was born, Shem fathered sons and daughters. Shem did. And within 30 years, so did Arphaxad. So as we go down the list, it reads like the first genealogy. Someone fathered someone of importance at a certain age and fathered sons and daughters, and Arphaxad fathered Salah. Nothing is known of Salah except that he fathered Eber. Now, as we mentioned before, Eber means one that passes beyond. He is regarded as the founder of the Hebrews. Now, can you see how God placed within the Hebrew mindset passing the news of God beyond themselves? One that passes beyond. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? We're supposed to pass the gospel beyond ourselves. So it is prophetic in that God expected the Hebrews to share the news of the only God with which we have to do. And sad to say, they ended up failing miserably. Instead, most of them adopted idol worship. could never understand idol worship. That's like me turning to my refrigerator in the kitchen. Oh, provider of food, thank you for. My goodness, that's ridiculous. The work of their own hands, and they worship it and say, thank you for providing me with this. That makes no sense to me. Next, we have Eber fathering Peleg, and all the while fathering other sons and daughters. They all were. And after all, brothers and sisters and first cousins and aunts and uncles had to marry each other to multiply, especially since the injunction against incest did not occur until the time of Moses. And Peleg did mean division. And he must have been born at the time when God decided to split the people up according to people and languages at the Tower of Babel. It's fair to say there probably were about 10,000, between 10,000 and 15,000 people. And you know what? In those days, that would have been a lot of people, especially since you just came from the 6. And 101 years later, you could have had that much, especially with all the intermarrying going on. And then God decided to split them up according to their tribes, languages, and nations. At the age of 30, Peleg fathered Reu, meaning friend in Hebrew, and after which he, for 209 years, begat sons and daughters. Reu was in the line of Abraham's ancestors. And you need to notice there was a decline in lifespans. So, starting with Arphaxad until now, the Shemitic people, the Shemite people, seem to have mostly settled down in the Fertile Crescent. A crescent that stretched from Ur of the Chaldees all the way around the Sinai Peninsula, all the way around, but mostly in Ur. And as we will notice, within the next 150 years, all that would change. So, this is why, from now on, the Bible concentrates on the descendants of Shem, because it's the people of Shem that would eventually make it possible for our Lord Jesus Christ to come on the scene.